Our story begins here in this house, Newmarket Court, in Duhallow in northwest Cork. The house was built around 1725 by Richard Allworth and remained in the Allworth family for the next 200 years. The house was purchased in 1927 by the Sisters of St. Joseph, an Australian order of nuns. At this point, the nuns had already recruited over 400 young Irish girls to their order with the help of an Irish priest, and they decided it was time to set up a base in Ireland. They chose Newmarket Court, and for the next 50 years the house was known as the convent. The nuns set up a convent school where another 300 girls were educated as postulants and sent to the novitiate in Australia. Who were these young girls who left Ireland on a boat at 15 or 16 years of age? How did they feel, certain that they would never see their families or Ireland again? This is their story of their time spent as young teenage postulants here in the convent in Newmarket.
I'm Sister Bernadine McAuliffe.
And I'm Sister Cameron McAuliffe.
And we were both born in Glenamuckler, the Glen of the Pigs.
And we're sisters, and we went to a famous school at Foyle. Just before I went to Newmarket, the two sisters from here visited the school. And I suppose I would have followed Bernadine. She'd already gone, and I wouldn't have, as I say, I didn't know any other sisters.
I'm Maura Murphy, and I was born in Ancient Earth Hand, outside Newmarket. One day some nuns came into the school and they asked us if we'd like to join them. And when I went home and I told my parents that I told them that I gave them the address that we had to join, they didn't have much, they didn't think, they thought, you've no intention at all. My mother said, you've no intention of joining those, have you? And I said, I don't know, you wouldn't know, I might, no?
My name is Maura Finucane Murphy, and I came from Newmarket. And I went to Tower National School, and from there I came to Newmarket Convent School. I was the eldest of 5 children, and as I say, I was always, I suppose, visiting this house as a youngster because I had 2 aunts who belonged to this order of nuns.
My name is Maureen Cahill. I grew up in Kilmeedy, County Limerick. I suppose my interest began quite early on in my life, really, that being a nun would be something I'd like to do. We got a magazine into the home, the Far East, and so the foreign missions was talked a lot about. And I used to think, oh yeah, I think I'd like to do that, and I'd love to do things for children particularly, maybe in countries in the Far East, wherever it was, I didn't have a clue.
I was 15 years old when I came to Newmarket. I was quite happy to come here because, as I say, I had memories of the house already in coming visiting.
When I first came to the convent at Newmarket, I was about 16 and a half, and I'd been looking at several congregations because they used to come round the schools, and I'd made inquiries with some of them, but they needed a dowry and my family weren't able to afford a dowry for me. I found the address in the Limerick Leader and I made contact with the sisters in Newmarket, and I got a lovely letter back and there was no mention of a dowry, so I thought, yes, I'll try that.
I remember we came in a horse and trap, my mother and father, and when I came up towards the building, I saw this big historical building, and I was a bit scared then.
My goodness me, we arrived and I saw this big house with a load of steps up to it, and I thought, oh, what a mansion, this is wonderful. I lived in quite a small house, so it was a huge change for me. And yes, so there was a bit of kind of mystique about it.
Then when I got inside the door and we met the nuns and they gave us a big welcome, and I began to feel at home a bit.
I felt quite excited. I mean, there was a bit of sadness in me because I was going to be away from my family, of course, but there was excitement as well because I thought, yes, I'm actually beginning to follow a dream.
I also came to Newmarket, but it was in September 1948. And Mum and Dad brought me, and that was in the horse and trap as well, and they were very, very subdued. My mother was very, very upset. And then I remember that when Bernadine had left 4 years before, I've never forgotten that weekend. Poor Mum was upset all that weekend. And I suppose it came to me that I was putting her through this. I was old enough to realise that I was putting her through the same thing. So I was very, very upset when we got here. And when Mum and Dad had left, one of the sisters sent me up with another couple of girls. We went out the back up to the hen house because they thought, well, it'd make me at home. Then when I came back and I met up with the other girls, I felt better. I felt better because I had company and there were plenty of people around.
At first I thought, oh dear, I'll never stay here. It was lonely. My mother brought me in. I can't remember now whether my father drove us in. I think he did, in a horse and trap. Saying goodbye was hard. I remember that in the front hall down there, and taking your case over upstairs where we slept, up to the third floor where we slept up there at the time. But everything was strange, and it was a big house. It was, you know, I didn't even, when I came in, to have a look around it the first time with my mother. We looked around, it was all right, but when you were there that night, that first night, it was kind of a lonely kind of a place. And you missed the closeness of family. And anyway, from there, we started off, and we went to bed fairly early, around 9 o'clock. Oh God, that was early for, you know. Then the nights in September was still kind of, you know, nice evenings and things like that. And you had to have a black dress, 2 black dresses, black cardigans, white collars, and all the underclothes, and, you know, shoes, black socks, 2 pairs of black shoes, and all the other things that you'd need. But so anyway, Katie, Dinny Bean, as we used to call her downtown, was very, very helpful in that regard. So Mum and myself, we went down, and Katie taught us material, what to get. And back behind us, there was a dressmaker at the same time, Kitty Kane. She's here still living in Newmarket. And Kitty made all my rig out for Newmarket. It was a very different lifestyle here from what we were used to, the free country life out on the farm. And even 13 and a half, you knew how to stand and make a wine of hay, or you knew how to foot turf, and you knew how to thin turnips. But here, life was very different. There was a lot of silence around, that you kept the rule of silence, and of course we were always forever breaking it, but never mind. There was punishments too for breaking silence.
Well, that was probably the one really that I really wanted to break a lot of the times, but we did, and we got away with it.
Silence, well God, we weren't used to silence much around, and running upstairs and downstairs, you were treated to be a lady.
And the rule would be then, well, you were quiet when you went to bed. But we were so tired, I don't think it worried us.
We slept way up in the heavens, way up on the top floor. And there were dormitories, of course.
And we used to kneel down and say our rosary up there, near that, before we went to bed. And I suppose that was important to us, because when we were growing up at home, the rosary was always said every night in our house. We grew up with that. Everybody had their own decade of the rosary to say. So it was nice when we used to go upstairs, we would say the rosary.
We usually got up, I think it was around 6 o'clock. You had to make your bed, wash yourself, do it very quickly, make your bed, and do a little charge, 10 minutes or something. You had a charge dusting the front room or doing the stairs there, maybe the steps or something, very quickly. And then Mass was at 6:45.
And we'd come out after Mass, we'd have our breakfast. And I used to like it, we always had nice porridge for breakfast. And then we came straight up to study.
And the day began as students.
We studied English, mathematics, geography, history, algebra and geometry, French. We did some Latin as well.
And some of the girls from the town, they learned typing and shorthand. And then a lot came, and they had music lessons.
I went ahead to do my GCE levels in England afterwards, but I was really had the level leaving the convent here.
The exam that we took at the end of our time there was the Oxford Senior, and that instead of doing the Irish examinations. Those of us that went on to Australia and New Zealand later on, it helped us to continue studying if we wanted to go to university and so on.
The education was wonderful, really, and also we had great skills. We learned a lot of skills and we learned a lot of social interaction, and as I say, we did have good recreation. We learned to perform in plays and dancing and ceilidh dancing and that kind of thing here in our recreation hall.
We'd go over there in the evenings and we would have dancing, and I loved that. So I learned how to dance the Siege of Ennis, the Walls of Limerick, the High Call Cap, the 8-hand reel, the Rakes of Mallow. Oh, we knew the lot, and I loved it.
And if the weather was fine, we used to go down the domain, we used to call it, that was the domain, down to the big gate, and there was a field down there, and we learned to play camogie. And some of us, I never had a camogie stick in my hand, but we quickly learned. We had a great time running around. So then, that was normal days. On a Sunday, we used to go for long walks after dinner.
We walked up Scartine and then out to the Island Woods.
We'd chat away, and two of the sisters came as well, and they were at the end of the line. Now and again, we'd either get a little parcel from home, or if we had visitors, we might get some little treats like biscuits and things like that. So, and we'd all share with each other. Yeah, I always had enough to eat, so that was good. There was a great orchard on the ground, so, and I particularly remember the wonderful pears out of the orchard.
And there was a sister here, she was from Australia, Sister Julia. And Sister Julia came, I don't know what year she came, but she died here and was buried here. She was in the kitchen, and she used to make us lovely cakes and nice things for feast days or for Sunday.
A significant time for me at Newmarket was when my sister died. Her name was Nora, and she was just 20 years of age. So I suppose it was a testing time for me too. But the sisters were so kind to me and so good, and they visited her in hospital. When she died, they went to the funeral. So I think their kindness to me at that time helped me to continue on the journey. And the interest they had in my family at that time meant a lot to my parents, because in actual fact, they were losing two of us within months of each other. And so I was always kind of grateful that they were so kind and made good connection with my parents at that time as well.
The last holiday home, I suppose, was July. And August we came back because we were leaving to go to Australia. But first, before we had to leave, you had to get permission from your parents. And the other girls had all got permission, but my father was very reluctant to give permission. They still thought that we were too young to be going to Australia. You didn't know what you were doing, you were too young and it's too far away and you mightn't be able to come home and all this. There was all those kind of worries for parents and the parents too. I think it was Hannah Shine and Billy that brought me into Newmarket because my mother was too sad to. And my father went out of the house, I remember, where they were too sad. And as you say, it was just a sad time.
I left in June 1947. Two lots went to Australia that year. It was after the war. We were the first ones to go after the war. The train was running at Newmarket. We went by train to Dublin.
And I left here in January 1951. And I went by train too up to Dunleary, and I can remember we went across on the boat. Our big boat was the Stratford. We went up, and the man, the agent, the travel agent, had come with us. We watched him go down the gangway, and we were all crying. We didn't know the man, but he was our last connection with Ireland. And strangely enough, when I was home one time, I went to Lourdes. and this travel agent was with us. And when he knew I was a sister, and he said, I used to go to, when I was a young boy, I used to go to Newmarket with my father. He used to put the sisters, send the sisters to Australia. And I said, well, I'm one of those girls that your father sent to Australia. And I told him the story, how I cried so hard when he left us.
It was only about a year and 3 or 4 months in Newmarket. And in December 1956, 7 of us set sail from Newmarket.
And it took us 6 weeks on travelling out then, 6 weeks on the boat.
We were at sea for Christmas, and so that was, you know, fairly lonely. And 2 other sisters of another congregation were kind of keeping an eye on us.
On the way, a music teacher, she was a lady from Cork, died on the boat, and she was buried at sea. I'll never forget it, to see the coffin being lowered into the Indian Ocean.
We didn't make many stops en route because the route was around the Cape of Good Hope. There was warfare on in the Suez Canal at the time, and I remember we made 2 stops, one in Las Palmas and one in Cape Town. And I think it was Las Palmas. We were going to visit this church, and we had to have our arms covered, so we only had 1 cardigan, I think, between us, so we had to keep sharing the cardigan to go in so that our arms were covered. We arrived in Australia on the 21st of January, then 1957, and we were officially received as postulants. Then we were sent to have some experience living in a community, and so we were separated at that stage, and following that we had 2 years in the novitiate.
After novitiate training, we were sent to Teachers College, and after Teachers College we were sent out to different states, wherever they needed people. I was sent to Western Australia. My first appointment out there was in Balder. It's just a couple of 3 kilometres or 4 kilometres from Kalgoorlie. Most people have heard of Kalgoorlie, the gold mine. I have great memories of the people we taught in schools, and then I went into parish ministry. And there was a shortage of personnel in parishes and things like that, so some of us went into parish ministry, and my first parish was Bustleton, and I enjoyed it for 7 years.
When I left, my understanding was that there was no return. In 1966, after the Vatican Council, it became possible that we would have home visits. So it was about 14 years until I had my first visit home.
And it was 20 years before I got to come home.
22 years, but I was very lucky. My parents were still alive.
So it was a great family kind of reunion again, but also a time of having to get to know family again. It's a long time to be away. My younger sister had intentions of following me, but my goodness, when I came back home, she's married with 5 very young children. So that was a wonderful kind of reconnecting to meet them for the first time.
I was in Australia 13.5 years, I'd say, before I came back to Ireland. And it was great to come back to see your family, see your brothers and sisters that were only 6 and 7 when you left. They had grown up, now 1920s. And, but again, it was always hard to leave, to go back, and it was hard for the family at home to say goodbye. We didn't have the same access to telephones, and there was none of these, emails or anything in those days. It was just the letters that were written once a month or something, whenever we were free to write. We came back every 5 years, and I was lucky to have my parents alive to be there for us, but the day came that they weren't there either. The congregation, as Sisters of St. Joseph, decided at one of our chapters that we have every 5 years that the Irish-born sisters could come back to their own country.
Any Irish-born sister who would want to live in Ireland could do so if you were retired, your pension age, or if you found yourself something to do here. We came home in 2001, and they started off a new respite care centre in Drumcallaghan.
I used to go over in the morning, and early morning, and the ladies used to have a hot cup of tea. So I was taking around a cup of tea, and they called me the cup of tea woman. Yeah.
I spent round about 44 years in New Zealand. I came back in 2006.
This is the suitcase that has travelled with me from the day I left here in 1960, August 1960. It has travelled with me by sea on the ship, the Orient, to Sydney. It has travelled with me from Sydney over to Western Australia, and it has been around all Western Australia.
At this time, there are just over 40 of us returned here to Ireland, and I'm here in Newmarket. Sister Maura and Bernadine and Carmel, natives of Newmarket, are now living in Charleville, and Maura Finucane is married and lives here in Newmarket. It's been a nice experience for me to be involved in this project. It's been lovely. It's given me that opportunity to reflect again on something that was very precious to me.
The convent closed in 1973. In total, over 700 young women left Ireland as postulants, bravely leaving their homes and families to begin their ministry halfway across the world in New Zealand and Australia. 40 of these women have returned to live in Ireland.